Hello lovely viewers, you are most welcome to our channel Poetry Online. In this video, we shall be discussing the detailed analysis of Weep Not Child by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to get updates on all our new videos. Once again, let us assure you of a very interesting discussion. Get ready for this lesson. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's novel, Weep Not Child, has as background the years preceding the emergency in Kenya, as well as a period of the emergency itself, which lasted from October 1952 to December 1959. The period, also known as the Mahua Rebellion, although the term Mahua was not used by the fighters themselves, and was probably coined by the enemies of freedom fighters in a bid to make the struggle a savage or have a bad reputation. During the early 20th century, the central highlands of Kenya, which was ancestral Kikuyu homeland, was settled by British and other European farmers. These settlers soon became wealthy growers of coffee and tea, while the Gikuyu people were obliged to be peasant farmers who lived on small parcels of land sold to them by the white farmers. The majority of Africans, in fact, became landless. Further to protect their interests, the white settlers banned the Africans from growing coffee and tea and confined Africans to less lucrative crops, and they also imposed a hand tax on Africans. Tired of having its grievances ignored, the African community, especially the Gikuyu, one of Kenya's largest ethnic groups, gradually moved towards more radical actions. There was some outbreak of violence in 1951, and then in the following year, the secret society, known as the Mahua, began a campaign of violence against Europeans and those Africans considered to be traitors. The novelist Ngugi wa Thiong'o turns history into fiction by his combined use of setting, characters, plot, and of course, point of view. Weep Not Child is set in a small African village called Mahua, which lies next to a town called Kipanga, situated on the main road which runs through the ridges and valleys of Gikuyu land and all the way to Nairobi. The setting is used by the novelist to first of all make the readers aware of the unfair land distribution imposed by the colonial administration. The first two valleys went to the country of the black people. The other two divided the land of the black people from the land of the white people. You could tell the land of the black people because it was red, rough, and sickly, while the land of the white settlers was green and not lacerated into small strips. The unfair distribution of land and therefore of wealth, which places the Africans in a vastly inferior position to the white settlers, is complicated by the presence of the Indian community, who seem to control mercantile activity in the small town. The Indian shops were many. The Indian traders were said to be very rich. They too employed some black boys whom they treated as nothing. The Indians feared Europeans, and if they were to buy in a shop and a white man found you, the Indian would stop selling to you and, trembling all over, would begin to serve him. Ngugi wa Thiong'o tells us that there are African shops too. These African shops were built in two rows facing one another, noisy and smelling strongly of burning meat, which the unemployed youth are to be seen hanging around, waiting for errands that might earn them a day's meal. For the Africans, the focus of social life is the barber shop, where the men gather when they were not working to hear stories about the Second World War and the latest news about political development in a big city. The impact of the historical development of the country is conveyed by Ngugi wa Thiong'o through what happens in three families of Ngotho, Jacobo, and the Hollands, which represent the three major classes of Kenyan society, in a narrative strategy that is both economic and powerful. Also, the entire social history of Kenya in the 1950s is expressed through these families. Ngotho's family represent the landless majority of Africans in Kenya who, being desperately poor, are readily radicalized and absorbed into the fight to reclaim their lost land as happens with Boro and others. The people at this level of society are obliged to make precarious living as laborers of white farmers who pay them very poorly. Above this class are the land-owning Africans who are represented in the novel by the Jacobo's family. Jacobo, as you will have noticed, is not permitted to grow tea or coffee, which was a preserve of the white farmers. Instead, Jacobo grows pyrethrum, a less profitable crop, which nevertheless makes him wealthy by African standard. The novel makes it clear that it is only the Jacobos among the Africans who own lands. Nganga, the carpenter, also owned land, and therefore is considered rich by the Africans. This man is, however, not a farmer, probably because the land is too small or the soil is too poor to support profitable agriculture. At the top of the social ladder is Mr. Hollands, representing the white settler farmers who own not only the best of land, but own it in large estates on which they grow coffee or tea and offered miserly employment to the original owners of the land, which were the Africans. The plot of the novel is Ngugi wa Thiong'o's way of demonstrating how the horribly unjust arrangement evolved historically into a violent confrontation. In other words, the plot imitates the logic of social development, showing how things change in the society. Ngotho's family, it will appear, are content to struggle to survive in their miserable poverty, placing their only hope in their youngest son, whose education will lift them out of poverty. Jacobo is already securing middle-class life for his children, who will eventually inherit his farm. As for Holland, his only worry is whether his remaining son will agree to inherit the opulent farm and the land which Howland believes to be his property by right. But as Ngugi wa Thiong'o sees it, change is coming, whether the three men at the head of their families see it or not. The change is motivated by unhappiness and the misery of the exploited laborers and workers, and is propelled more forcefully by anger of young men like Boko, who have fought for the white men in the Second World War and certainly do not believe in the assumed superiority of the Europeans. It is these young men who, unable to bear the injustice at home, will take to the forest and persuade others to do the same, as in the case of Borum. Ngugi wa Thiong'o shows that the rebellion is fueled by anger of dissatisfied Africans. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's novel concludes as a near tragedy. This is because he runs through the characters and the plots to show the disastrous consequences of the rebellion. All three families are destroyed by the events that take place in the community. They may not have realized it, but the families shared a common destiny in the Kenyan nation. It was blind for the Hollandese and the Jacobos to believe that they could live in prosperity while the Ngothos were kept down in desperate poverty. However, the path of Kenyan history, as Ngugi wa Thiong'o charts it in his novel, does not end in a totally hopeless destination. In the end, the dreamer, Njoroge, wakes up to the burden of responsibility that he has to assume, and in the last sentence of the novel, opens the door for his two mothers. He has to rebuild his life for the sake of his mothers, whom he now looks after, and like Wahaki, he too must wait for hope for a new day. The history of Kenya, as Ngugi wa Thiong'o presents it, does not end with the death and destruction brought by the emergency. The nation, as represented by the youth in the novel, will wake up to a new, more caring and more responsible day. The point of view employed by Ngugi wa Thiong'o is very successful in its account of Kenya's history. While the novel employs a third-person narrator, many events are recounted as Njoroge sees them or feels about them. Indeed, to a large extent, Weep Not Child is Njoroge's story because the story is largely about the mental development of Njoroge, and the narrator tends to present events in his level of understanding. This means that there is a deliberate simplicity about the way history is presented, and we can illustrate this by the way in which an important element in the history of Kenya is presented in the novel. The Mau Mau Rebellion, was also a cause for major developments in the historical evolution of Kenya, which led to some 7 years of violence in which thousands of Africans were killed. When the Mahua rebellion comes up again for discussion among Njoroge and his friends, the unqualified adulation of its leader was mellowed somewhat. The killing of people by both the forest hunters and the home guards has created fear and uncertainty. The home guards with the white masters, they are as bad as Mau Mau. No, Mau Mau is not bad. The freedom boys are fighting against white settlers. Is it bad to fight for one's land? Tell me that. But they cut black men's throats. Those killed are traitors, black-white settlers. What is Mau Mau? Njoroge asked. He had never known what it was, and his curiosity overcame his fear of being taught ignorant. Karanja, who has just joined the group, said, "It is a secret Kiama. You drink oath. You become a member. The Kiama has its own soldiers who are fighting for the land. Kimati is the leader, not Jomo." "Not Jomo?" a small boy with one bad eye asked. "I don't know," Karanja continued, "but father says Kimanzi is a leader of the Freedom Army and Jomo is a leader of the KAU. I like KAU and fear Mau Mau." The very opening scene of the novel throws the readers into the family of Ngotho, where Njoroge is being informed by his mother that he is to be given an opportunity to go to school. In that scene, the two facts which the author underlines about the family are its extreme poverty and its warm closeness of its members. Njoroge is of course overjoyed at the news. The fact that his family cannot afford to provide him with a midday meal, which most people will probably be enjoying, does not in the least dampen his enthusiasm. He is especially thrilled that, in addition to the education he will be receiving, he will for the first time be wearing a shirt and a pair of shorts. Until that moment, he has had nothing but a piece of calico to cover his nakedness. Njoroge cannot wait to share the news to his elder brother, actually half-brother Kamau. And it is the eldest brother's response when Njoroge expresses regret that Kamau cannot go to school with him, which underscores the love that prevailed in Ngotho's family. "Do not worry about me. Everything will be alright. Get education. I'll get carpentry. Then we shall in future be able to have a new and better home for the whole family." Ngotho, as a husband and father, is a source of love that prevails in his homestead. Ngotho guides his family with his loving hands. When we first meet him, he is enjoying the meal company at the barber's shop. He, however, tears himself away from the fun because he does not want to upset his two wives, Nyere and Nyokabi, for whom he had bought equal portions of meat, not wanting to stir up jealousy. But although he is a considerate husband, he does harbor a fair share of traditional male prejudice. He knew that his two wives liked each other and were good companions and friends, but you could not quite trust women. They were fickle and very jealous. When a woman was angry, no amount of beating will pacify her. Ngotho did not beat his wives much. On the contrary, his home was well known for being a place of peace. All the same, one had to be careful. Such is the tenderness of Ngotho's relationship with his wife, and they are able to tease him on how quick he has been in returning from work. Indeed, we discover that this is a family in which the sons can tease their mothers and the mothers their husbands in front of their children. We learn that many young men from Mahua Ridge usually gather in the heart of Ngotho's first wife, Nyere, to shorten the night by storytelling. Thus, storytelling being a favorite form of nighttime entertainment, Ngotho himself is a good storyteller, and it is in one of these story sessions that he recounts the creation myth of Gikuyu and Mumbi. The myth, which confers ownership of Gikuyu land to the Gikuyu people, also recounts that the prophecy of Mugua Kibiro, the Kiguyu overseer, who foretold that eventually the land will be returned to its rightful owners. Ngotho's homestead served as a kind of social center for the Mahua rage, where people, especially young men, come to entertain themselves by listening to stories and learn things about their ancestral laws. But in the gathering of young men, there is one who is distinguished from the others by his anger and his impatience towards the old ways of doing things. The young man is Boro. In him, the readers see first signs of the heart of Ngotho's very traditional home of change that is to come. Boro's response to his father's enthralling story is one of impatient rejection. As he listened to this story, all these things came into his mind with growing anger. How could these people have let the white man occupy their land without acting? In a whisper that sounded like a shout, he said, "To hell with the prophecy." Yes, it was nothing more than a whisper. To his father, he said, "How can you continue working for a man who was taking your land? How can you go on serving him?" He walked out without waiting for an answer. Social life in the community at the opening of the novel is not confined to the evenings in the Ngotho's homestead. For the men, there is also the barber shop in town where the best gossips may be heard. Like Boro, the barber has been to a soldier in the big war, but has not been made sour by the experience. Instead, the war has provided him with the adventure with which he holds his audience captive. While Africans, he claims, were only allowed to be porters in the First World War, he and others who served in the Second World War carried guns and shot white men. White men? Yes, they were not guards we had taught them to be. We even slept with their women. Ha! How are they? Not different, not different. I like a good fleshy black body with sweat. But they are, so thin, without flesh, nothing. With this kind of salacious talk, it is small wonder that the barber shop holds the men captive. When Ngotho leaves the shop, he can't help wondering if the barber's story about white women is true. After Ngotho's brave and harsh attack of the traitor Jacobo, it is at the barber shop that the community assesses the old man's braveness, and the verdict is that not only is Ngotho courageous, but has acted as a true African. As for Jacobo, he is condemned by the gathering as a selfish man who does not want his fellow Africans to become rich like him. The barber's shop serves in the novel as a forum of African public opinion, as if to establish a deliberate contrast between Ngotho's homestead, which is happy and sociable, and the homes of the more affluent men of the community. Neither Jacobo nor the homelands seem to run a particularly warm household. Jacobo seems to have been successful with the education of his children. His son, John, is said to go abroad to further studies. His daughter, Lucia, is a teacher, and Nwihaki is in school with Njoroge. Jacobo also has small children who are too young to be in school. However, the author, ngugi wa thiong'o, does not offer a glimpse into the family to enable the reader see how they relate with one another. One can also guess from Nwahaki's almost total attachment to Njoroge towards the end of the novel that she is not as close to her family as Njoroge is to his family. The gulf between Jacobo's family and the wider African society is indicated by the disastrous party to which Jacobo's wife, Juliana, invites the children of her husband's workers. During Juliana's excessively long grace, Njoroge stares at the children giggling, and they end up receiving a lecture on the importance of good manners. As for Howlands, he is not only removed from the African society, he is isolated from the other members of his own family. His life is entirely dedicated to his farm. Even his wife does not matter to him as much as the works in his farm. Howland has brought his wife, Susanna, to Kenya simply to satisfy his sexual needs. As he says, he cannot go about the natives as some had done, but once he gets his wife to accompany him to Kenya, he proceeds to ignore her and devotes all his energy to the farm, while his wife consoles herself with the son she soon bears and with the beating of the African servants. For a while, as his son grows up, Hollands becomes something of a family man, walking through the farm with his son, happy that someday someone will inherit this from him. Unfortunately, the son is called to war and is killed. We are told that if not for the farm, Hollands would have been a destroyed man, or Hollands would have destroyed himself. Though he is blessed with another son, Stephen, and with an older daughter who has turned a missionary, Hollands is essentially a man alone. He lives entirely for his farm and cannot be said to be happy. There is also a community of Indians who own a bigger shop in Kipanga. The Indians are said to be rich and to employ some African boys whom they treat as nothing. One of them has once employed Ngotho and has deliberately held a month's payment, which Ngotho, when he leaves in dissatisfaction, is obliged to forfeit. Naturally then, there is much antagonism between the Africans and the Indians. Njoroge remembers a gesture of unexpected kindness when an Indian child gives him a sweet. He accepts the sweet only to incur the wrath of his mother. Is it that you have not eaten anything a whole year? Are you to be greedily taking anything you are given by anyone, even a dirty little Indian? Njoroge threw it away, but he had helped him because the boy saw him do it. He both ached and feared to go back and tell him something, but he did not then go. Days later, he went to the same place. The boy was not there. It appears from all indication that the hatred of Indians is passed down from parents to their children among the Africans. School for Njoroge becomes the most significant social institution and the place where he forms the most important relationship of his life outside his family. Owahaki, the youngest daughter of Jacobo, takes him to school and protects him against the older boys who want to bully him, calling him Njuka. The two gradually form a bond, which will persevere throughout the turbulence of the emergency, even though Njoroge's brother will be the one to murder Owahaki's father. The relationship begins with them working together after school and develops into a bond of love which they themselves do not quite understand. Njoroge also comes to admire and respect his teachers. There is this teacher, nicknamed Yuyu, who introduces Njoroge and his classmates to the alphabet. This jovial character is said not to be a good Christian because he allegedly drinks and smokes and goes about with women, and is later murdered during the emergency while leading a group of worshippers to a prayer meeting. The other teacher Njoroge gets to know is Lucia, Owahaki's older sister, who teaches Njoroge beginner's English and is much frustrated by her slow-witted class. Annoyed, "Class, what is she doing?" Singing, "You are standing up." Still more angry, "I am asking you, what is she doing?" Afraid, quietly singing, "You are standing up." "Look here, you stupid and lazy fools. How long do you take to catch things? Didn't you go over all this yesterday? If I come tomorrow and find that you make a single mistake, I'll punish you severely." Njoroge himself is a rather quiet people who spends a great deal of his time in school, sitting by himself in a corner, but who does well at his studies. Apart from Oahaki, he does not appear to have any real friend among his schoolmates. He is too much of a dreamer. At a moment in the story, Oahaki is obliged to ask him, "Why do you keep alone?" "To avoid me," and Njoroge is ashamed. At Syriana Secondary School, Njoroge seems more adjusted. He seems to be well liked and is teased by his classmates about his happiness during the English class and less buoyant mood during the maths class. He is full of admiration for the devotion of the missionary teachers who seem to treat all people with respect, whether black or white, and is unable to see through the racism of the headmaster, who believing that real excellence can only come from the white man, brings up his African students to copy and cherish the white man's civilization as the only hope of mankind, and especially the black race. Njoroge sees Rihanna as a center for learning that will enable him fulfill his unrealistic dreams of single-handedly delivering his country from injustice and poverty. The school for him is a place where he can meet God not only in the cool shelter of the chapel, but also in the quietness of the library. All three of the major adults undergo a change or changes in the course of the story. Our concern is to understand the forces which compel these characters to transform themselves, to ask ourselves whether or not we are sympathetic to them. For many readers, Ngotho, not Njoroge, is a hero of Weep Not Child, where the term hero does not just mean the central character, but also the one who embodies the positive moral values of work, and who, despite his weaknesses, still attracts the reader's sympathy. As we have already noted, Ngotho at the beginning of the novel is a loving husband and a father whose homestead attracts the youth of the entire race. As we have noted, the catalyst that helps transform this gentle old man to the status of a hero is his own son, Boro. When his son taunts him for being content to work as a laborer for a man who has taken his land, Ngotho begins to feel inadequate and feels the need to assert his manhood. And yet, Ngotho's apparent civility has an explanation. Believing in the prophecy of Mahua Kibiro, he thinks that the whites will one day go away and his land will be restored to him. This explains why he thinks Holland's Shamba so lovingly and why his attitude to nature is generally so passionate and sensitive. He believes the land is a gift to his ancestors from Murungo, which he is enjoined by God's commandment to till in serenity. Indeed, it would be appropriate to describe Ngotho's attitude to the farm and the land as spiritual. What Howland does not know is that Ngotho does consider the farm and the land on which it is growing as his own, and that it is his responsibility to guard it for the dead, the living, and the unborn of his line. But for Boro, the old man would have been content to work for Howland until the prophecy's fulfillment. But his angry son changes all that. Ngotho, under pressure from his son, feels that he must be a man, and that he must support the strike that has been called for workers and laborers. As it is to be expected, the incipient radicalization of the old man affects his role as a father and husband. Njoroge comes from school one day to find his mother and father quarreling, and as his mother continues to rail at her husband, the old man hits her across the face and raises his hand to do so again. Ngotho's conduct on the day of strike makes him a hero in the eyes of the African community at the barber shop. He rushes to attack Jacobo, whom he sees as a traitor to the African cause. As a result of his heroic but rash action, he is badly hurt by the police and thrown off Jacobo's land, where he had been living as a Muhoi. What is worse, his son, Boro, blames him for the failure of the strike. After all, it was meant to be peaceful, and his rash actions on Howland had given the police the excuse to wade in and break it up. It is during the time of field strike that relations between Ngotho and Boro reach its lowest point. Boro tries to make his father take the Mau oath, but the old man refuses. To take the oath from his own son will be contrary to Gikuyu customs, and so, even though he feels a loss of the land more keenly than Boro, he would not submit to his own son. The state between father and son hurts the old man deeply and worsens his grief. It is at this that Jomo Kenyatta, the great hope of the oppressed Africans, is arrested by the colonial government. Ngotho can no longer look anybody in the face, not even his wife, and the joy in his homestead disappears. When we next meet Ngotho, he is in detention, haunted by the feeling that he has failed his children. He surrenders to Howlands in an effort to take on the punishment for the murder of Jacobo. In prison, he is tortured in all manners of ways. The death of Ngotho is also his moment of triumph. Released from the home guard post, he is physically a wreck as a result of the torture he has endured. He is still, however, tormented by the sense of inadequacy as a father. When Njoroge comes to see him, the old man thinks his son has come to mock him. Finally, Boro comes in pertinent in the knowledge that the old man has been tortured for the crime he committed. "Forgive me, father," Boro pleaded. "I didn't know." Finally, there is a reconciliation between father and son, as the dying patriarch is transformed again into the pillar he was once of his homestead. Commanding Boro to fight well and bidding Njoroge to take care of his two wives, Ngotho finally dies a hero. He seems to impart strength as he dies to his assembled family, for nobody cries. He dies a revolutionary, accepting the necessity of the struggle to reclaim the lost land. More than any other character, he deserves the reader's respect and sympathy. If Ngotho is arguably the hero of the novel, Howland is its supreme villain, or at least one of its villains. But such is the intelligence of the author, ngugi wa thiong'o, that instead of presenting the white settlers as a flat cardboard figure of evil, he makes him, at least initially, a person with motive, and that the readers can understand, even if he cannot completely agree with them. The disillusionment with European civilization is what brings Howlands to Africa. As a young man in England, he has gone with enthusiasm to fight in the First World War and been horrified by blood and destruction. Back home after the war, he has found a peacetime condition in England absolutely unbearable. Needing to escape, he had to come to Africa, a wild continent asking to be conquered. One can understand the need to get away from the awful violence of Europe, but Howland's assumption, which is shared with thousands of other disillusioned Europeans, that Africa was an empty space begging for European occupation, was a dishonored pretense. In the case of Howlands, the land he comes to occupy is Ngotho's ancestral land. It is for this reason that the destinies of two men are inevitably linked. The author, ngugi wa thiong'o, goes to great pains to contrast Howland's attitude to the land with Ngotho's attitude to the land. We have noted how Ngotho feels ashamed when he disturbs a drop of dew. His attitude to the land, as we have noted, is that it is a sacred heritage which he must guard and preserve for future generations. For Howlands, however, the land is something he must conquer. In the same way that a man may tame a wild animal and put it to profitable use. The emergency clearly brings out the unexpressed racism of Howlands, who feels more responsibility towards his animals than his laborers. He finds it unthinkable that creatures who are no better animals should challenge his way of life. Defeating them will bring him a satisfaction akin to the satisfaction of conquering the land. This explains the viciousness with which he performs his role as district officer. He has no feelings for Africans as human beings and feels he is defending the way of life he has secured for himself through his individual strengths. Even the manner of Howland's death is consistent with his perverse logic and could be regarded as heroic if it were not so profoundly misguided. Facing certain death at the hands of Boro, Howlands insists that "this is my land." According to the narrator, he says this as a man would say, "This is my woman." That is, as something one possesses passionately. When Boro shoots him, Howland's rank stands defiantly for a few seconds before falling. There is indeed something courageous about Howland's death, but his courage is founded on and is in defense of a cruel injustice. he fails to win the reader's sympathy unless the reader supports what he stands for. Jacobo is in many ways the least admirable of the three men. He is an African who, having attained a measure of success, turns his back on his fellow Africans and becomes a pawn in the hands of the white settlers. His role in the strike is shameful when seen from an African perspective, but even more disgraceful is his role as chief of the Home Guards, whose duty is to report on fellow Africans for the benefit of the Europeans. His case is more contemptible by the fact that the white man for whom he works for has no respect for him whatsoever. But as usual with ngugi wa thiong'o, even the treacherous Jacobo is shown to have a sympathetic side. This is shown when he surprises Njoroge and his daughter Wahaki in his house and shows interest in Njoroge's education, saying, "I hope you do well. It is such as you who must work hard and rebuild the country." Njoroge notices that at that moment Jacobo looks tired and is not a proud old farmer. The relationships between these three people are of great symbolic significance. Njoroge's relationship with Wahaki, though not forbidden by their parents, represents the coming together of the poor, landless Africans and the wealthier landed Africans. In a sense, it is a triumph of a natural attraction over social impediment, and it is to the credit of Jacobo that he does not reprimand his daughter or threatens Njoroge when he finds the two of them together in his house, especially given the history between him and Ngotho. Njoroge's friendship with Stephen, which is not given a chance to develop, represents a possible bridge between the very poor and the very rich in the Kenyan society, and therefore the possibility of a greater racial and class harmony in future. Stephen tells us that he will be going to England to seek shelter from the violence of the emergency, but we can assume that with his father's death, he and his mother will be going back to see the family property. Towards the end of the novel, the narrator comes down very hard on Njoroge and exposes him bluntly as a young man who for most of the story has been out of touch and reality, and who has exhibited a marked tendency to seek refuge in dreams. Njoroge had always been a dreamer, a visionary who had consoled himself faced by the difficulties of the moment by a look at a better day to come. A little later in the story, when his two mothers are inconsolable because his father is approaching death, the narrator again makes a remark which is very critical of Njoroge. For the first time, Njoroge was face to face with a problem to which tomorrow was no answer. It is perhaps useful to examine Njoroge's life in the light of these remarks from the narrator. What evidence is there to indicate that Njoroge indeed leads a life of illusion and is hardly in touch with reality? The young man is not alone in seeing education as a key to future. Many boys of his generation and class held the same view. However, his isolation from his immediate neighbors, Jacobo's children, means that he is obliged to depend on books for companionship. And with the Bible as his favorite book, Njoroge sees development in his country through a biblical mist, which perhaps confuses his sense of reality. Njoroge came to place faith in the Bible. Indeed, Njoroge's belief consists of weird mixture of Christianity and Gikuyu folklore, which bears little relation to the problems confronting contemporary Kenya. The readers cannot help feeling that ngugi wa thiong'o is mocking Njoroge as someone who has been misled by his education into holding beliefs that are irrelevant to his society and his problems. His identification of Gikuyu people with the children of Israel in the Bible is fanciful and invalid. In practical terms, Njoroge's belief leads to the kind of pacifism which even his own father rejects in the end. In effect, Njoroge has been educated to become an ally of the white man. Listening to the people talk about Jomo Kenyatta, Njoroge feels that he already knows this man, that he has read about the Old Testament. The readers begin to wonder if Njoroge is ever going to be shaken out of his unrealistic Christian dreams, whether this boy will ever wake up to the reality around him. The answer comes soon enough with his arrest, detention, and torture, which are followed by the death of his father, the imprisonment of his brother, and the coming execution of his other brother. He himself, taken out of Syriana, is reduced to working for a while in an Indian shop as his illiterate father had done all those years ago. He has his two mothers to feed at this dark time, so losing the job is a heavy blow. Wahaki, the love of his life, is his last hope for happiness, and he seems finally to have lost faith in the God of Abraham. His final meeting with Wahaki is awkward. It is his brother, after all, who has murdered her father. Ever the escapist, he proposes earnestly that they should run away to Uganda, and ever the realist, she turns him down. She cannot abandon her widowed mother. She is clearly more courageous than him and is prepared to embrace the difficulties of today and the hope for a better tomorrow. She adores more realistically. The message has only superficially bandied about. Shattered, he tries to kill himself, but is stopped in the act by his mother. Finally, he wakes up to his responsibility, confronts his cowardice, and opens the door to their dwelling for his two mothers. Thanks for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video.